A 2.5 year long standoff over oil between Baghdad and Erbil has just ended. For the first time since March 2023, Kurdish oil exports are flowing again. Omar, just how significant is this development?
It's actually massive. We're looking at a deal that could eventually unlock over 500,000 barrels of oil per day. And that's going to be a game changer for Kurdistan, for Iraq. That will also have impact for the global energy markets.
Welcome to this week's Iraq Briefing, where we break down the top stories shaping Iraq today. I'm Eric Gustafson.
And I am Omar Nidawi.
On September 27th, Kurdistan rejoined the global oil markets. We're discussing the important development in a decades long standoff over oil between the federal government of Iraq and the Kurdistan Regional Government. Exports from the Kurdistan region's oil fields, halted since March 2023, have finally restarted via the Iraq Turkish export pipeline to the Mediterranean port of Ceyhan. Omar, we're now 2 weeks into this deal. So the most important question to ask is the deal sticking?
Yes, so far.
Alhamdulillah. So, can you bring us up to speed on the current export situation, specifically how much oil is now flowing and through what channels?
Yeah, so on September 27th, oil exports started flowing again from the Kurdistan region to Turkey through the Iraq-Turkey pipeline. Kurdistan region is producing about 230,000 barrels per day of oil. About 50,000 barrels are reserved for domestic consumption, while about 180 to 190,000 barrels per day are being delivered to SOMO, that's Iraq's state oil marketing organization, to be exported through the pipeline to the Turkish port of Ceyhan. In the meantime, companies that are operating the Kurdistan region's fields are being compensated temporarily for the production and transportation costs at a rate of $16 per barrel. This is a temporary arrangement under the amendments that Iraq's parliament passed to the federal budget law in February, but a private or a third party consultant is going to be doing an assessment of the actual cost of production and transportation per field, and then that will establish the rate of compensation of cost recovery going forward. But so far, this amount of oil is going to the tanks. I think at least one cargo has shipped to European customers last week, so things are moving smooth so far.
Wow, wow. And speaking of these different oil fields, what about the oil fields in Kirkuk?
Okay, so there's still no clarity on whether Iraq is also going to send oil from the Kirkuk fields that are under the authority and operation of the federal Iraqi government, along with the oil coming from Kurdistan through the pipeline. This was the arrangement that Baghdad and Erbil had in the past between late 2018 and into 2023. There was a mix of oil, but that stopped in 2023, and it's not clear if this is going to start yet. Also, should mention that one of the oil producers in the Kurdistan region, one of the foreign oil companies, DNO from Norway, has not joined this deal yet. So there's one holdout that's still sending its oil or selling its oil domestically, although some of the oil may be finding its way also into the pipeline. There's a little bit of ambiguity about that case.
Interesting. And that's a reminder that this is an agreement not just between federal Iraq and the Kurdistan Regional Government of Iraq, but also with the oil companies themselves, correct?
Absolutely. It's a trilateral agreement that took months and months to negotiate. Again, the initial agreement happened in February, but since then we've been getting a lot of false starts, false alarms every other week. You know, some senior official says, oh, the oil is going to flow tomorrow. It's going to flow next week. It's going to, exports are going to start anytime now. And we kept repeatedly hearing those announcements over the months until we basically there was a bit of a numbness towards announcements like that until the breakthrough happened in the last week of September with this trilateral agreement. The companies seem to be happy about it, so it is possible that DNO would join the group based on reporting. The main issue that's still in dispute is the arrears. There are amounts that are owed to the oil companies by the Kurdistan Regional Government for exports that were made in late 2022 and early 2023, about $1 billion worth
Mm.
of arrears. And the Iraqi government is not is not willing to claim responsibility for that or to basically be on the hook for that money. The KRG doesn't have the money, so that's still, I think, the one sticking point.
Okay. So let's now talk about more about the Iraqi government, the Kurdistan Regional Government. What halted the exports in the first place? And given so much pain for both those sides, why did it take so long to come to an agreement?
Yeah, I mean, it's this is a long dispute. Started really with the start of the post 2003 political system in Iraq. The KRG and the federal government could not agree on a unified oil policy. They failed to pass a federal oil and gas law, and they went in separate ways. In 2009, the KRG started signing its own oil contracts with foreign oil companies, and in 2014, as Iraq was dealing with the war with ISIS, KRG finished building its own pipeline through Turkey or to Turkey and started selling oil independently, unilaterally of the Iraqi federal government's authority. And that upset Baghdad, of course. Baghdad filed an arbitration case against Turkey, saying that Turkey is violating the terms of the treaty that governs the use of the pipeline. And eventually, Baghdad won that case in 2023, and that ruling, which awarded Baghdad $1.5 billion in damages, halted the exports. And it took these 2.5 years to iron out all the different problems. And it took so long because there are a lot of problems. This is almost 2 decades of disputes with compounding complexities of accounts, of budget disputes, of payments and partial payments, and ad hoc agreements that worked for a few days or a few weeks and then failed. So there's a lot of baggage there. And again, it's not a bilateral problem. It's trilateral or multilateral because you have a dispute between Baghdad and Turkey over the use of the pipeline. You have a dispute between Baghdad and Erbil over the pipeline and the legality of the oil contracts. You have issues between the KRG and the oil companies and between Baghdad and the oil companies about how to structure the oil contracts in a way that is, aligned well with Iraq's federal laws and constitution. Because there are two very different policies in management of oil contracts between Baghdad and Erbil. So that took a lot of time to iron out. And I think there's also the issue that we must not forget here is that oil is not really just a source of revenue. For the KRG, it's political power. It's also a source of autonomy. Let's not forget that oil exports were an important enabler of increased financial autonomy and political autonomy for the KRG that encouraged or was a big factor in the decision to organize that referendum on independence in 2017. And that, of course, we know how that backfired. Baghdad recaptured a lot of the oil fields and the territory that the KRG had controlled, and that forced the KRG to lose much of its exports. So it's a mix of contractual complexities, legal complexities, international trade issues, as well as a struggle for power and autonomy itself within Iraq. So all of that is at stake here.
Interesting, interesting. It's also always so fascinating in terms of the relationship between Erbil and Baghdad and how important that is, and then trying to seek that other party as a pathway to independence, which would have been an agreement with Turkey, right?
Hmm.
And to depend on an external power rather than to work from within, yeah, it didn't work out so well. So, as you just said, revenue was also a factor, a big factor. The government of the Kurdistan Regional Government, Iraq's government, depends on that revenue to pay for so much of, public salaries and services. So, what happened in the Kurdistan region during that interim period since March 2023? How was the KRG able to function financially? And for the residents of the region, how did it impact the economy and their livelihoods?
Well, things have been very difficult within the Kurdistan region. It's been a a low-level financial crisis for 2 years or more. The KRG has been struggling to pay salaries for its employees. There have been ad hoc agreements with Baghdad to fund some of the salaries, but that's been contingent on the KRG sharing its non-oil revenue with Baghdad. And again, there's issues of autonomy and authority and legality that have been difficult to resolve. The KRG, in an effort to try and make ends meet, has been selling oil at a steep discount to local and neighboring markets. There's been a lot of oil trucking happening over time. Oil producers would sell on the in the local market, and that oil will be trucked through Iran, through Turkey, through any of the neighboring countries at basically half the market price. And that's been fetching some money for the KRG and for the oil companies, but not really enough to stay alive and functioning. So in the past, we've seen employees, civil servants going without pay for months at a time, and this has led to economic depression and led to even civil unrest and protests. And it's been a factor that exacerbated also tensions and disputes between the ruling parties in the Kurdistan region, the PUK and KDP.
So, the multi billion dollar, shall we say, question, can we expect this deal to hold and what should we be watching for?
Well, there are a number of issues to pay attention to here. First, like we said earlier, not all of the oil companies in the Kurdistan region are on board with this. So things could fall apart at any point, I think, depending on whether or not the three parties find a solution to the arrears for the oil companies. There's also the issue of what happens when the international consultant determines the cost of production and transportation. Is everyone going to be happy with that figure if or with those numbers if they come too high or too low? That could throw a wrench in the works. There's also a bit of an expiration date for this deal in the fact that the treaty that governs the use of the Iraq-Turkey pipeline expires in July of 2026, and Turkey has expressed strong interest in renegotiating that treaty. Turkey may ask for higher transit fees. Turkey might ask for additional capacity for full utilization of the pipeline so that it can generate more revenue from it. In the past, Turkey has complained that this oil pipeline was built to handle 1.5 million barrels of oil per day, but it's handling only a fraction of that. So there are a lot of issues in the details and the technicalities and the infrastructure that supports this deal that could unravel at any point. And we know that there has been a long history of deals that did not last more than a few weeks or a few months at best. So we'll have to wait and watch and see if this deal fades all of these, landmines that are along its path.
Yeah, that's going to be so important. I mean, it's so vital, I think, for an economy for, millions of people are depending on it in terms of livelihood. So, and one of the things we talked about recently, you and I, is how not having that revenue really also constrains the government's ability to upgrade infrastructure, to deal with flooding issues, to work on some of the climate action that's needed, like supporting farmers with drip irrigation. Um, and speaking of, just a quick note to our viewers, we will be having a report coming out very soon. It will be coming out this week. That is a deep dive looking at drip irrigation based on over a month of field research and interviews. So be looking for that. And we'll be sharing it also, of course, through our weekly Iraq Security and Humanitarian Monitor, ISHM. So be sure to subscribe to that as well.
And by the way, we should also not forget that November is coming close and there will be an election in Iraq and things could change. That we haven't mentioned the effect of politics on this deal. And I think it's important to mention this, Eric. Come December or January, And I know that government formation in Iraq can take sometimes more than a few months. But come December or January, there could be a new government in Baghdad. We know that Erbil is probably not going to have many differences in the government structure over there, but in Baghdad there could be a drastically different government from the one that we have right now in the way that it approaches relations with Erbil. So that's another variable, I think an important variable that could affect the longevity of this deal.
Yeah, so we'll be following that closely. That's it for this week's Iraq briefing. For news and analysis, visit us at enablingpeace.org. If you found this useful, please share it with friends, subscribe, leave comments, and until next week, masalama.
Ma salama.